As we continue to learn about genetics, it is important to note that some human traits can be controlled differently. For example, some traits are controlled by a single gene that has two alleles. An example of this would be whether or not you have attached or free earlobes. Some people's earlobes attach to their head versus others that kind of have a freestanding one. And that's completely controlled by one gene that has two alleles. A widow's peak is another example. A second way that human traits are controlled is by a single gene that actually has multiple alleles, so more than two. So they have three or more forms of a gene that code for a single trait. And an example of that is human blood type. So you can see here, if you have type A, you can have either of these two allele combinations. If you have type B, you can have either of these. If you have type AB, it could be either of these. And type O, it could be this. You don't need to memorize the different combination of alleles, but you do need to know that human blood type is an example of a trait that is controlled by a single gene with multiple alleles. Finally, you can have many genes that are acting together. For example, at least 4 genes control human height, and other examples of traits that are controlled by multiple genes include skin, eye, and hair color. For right now, let's not worry about the writing that's on the right-hand side. Within the set of 23 pairs of chromosomes, there is one chromosome that is known as the sex chromosome. And this is one of the 23 pairs of chromosomes in each of your body cells, and it carries the genes that determine whether or not a person is male or female. It is the only chromosome pair that does not always match, but does match if you are a girl. So this image here shows you what the sex chromosomes look like. X looks like this, Y looks like that, and you can see here that X and X for female. So a male is going to be XY, and a female is going to be XX. It is the 23rd chromosome of your 23 pairs. This is important to note because it can lead to sex-linked genes, and these are genes that are carried only on the X and the Y chromosomes because their, not heir, alleles are passed from parent to child. An example of a sex-linked trait is red-green colorblindness. This is because red-green colorblindness is a recessive allele that lives on the X chromosome. Remember that a recessive trait is expressed when it is present without the presence of a dominant allele. Since it only lives on the X chromosome, and men only have one X chromosome, they are going to express that trait because they only have one X chromosome. A carrier, a female, can be a carrier, is a person who has one recessive allele for a trait and one dominant trait. So, for example, if we were to think about color blindness and have C be the dominant, meaning that the person does not have color blindness, and lowercase c to be the recessive, meaning that the person is colorblind, you would see here in females, they can be homogeneous for the dominant trait, but in order to have color blindness, they actually have to be homogeneous recessive. This person here would be a carrier. And if this person, who's a male, has the one recessive allele for colorblindness, they will express it. This Punnett square does a good job of showing some options. In this case, we have an example of a mother who is a carrier. And you can see that she is a carrier, not just because it says that she's a carrier, but because she has one capital C and one lowercase c, meaning that she has one of the recessive alleles and one of the dominant alleles. You'll see that rather than just a capital C and a lowercase c, it's attached to an X. That shows us that it is linked to the 23rd chromosome. It's on the 23rd chromosome, and it's a sex-linked trait. We can see the father here has normal vision. This mother, because she's a carrier, also has normal vision. And you can see that he has, on his 1X chromosome, he has a capital C, which tells you that it's the dominant normal vision option. Now, when we create a Punnett square, what we have here, we can see the potential outcomes for their children. In this case, taking the X information and putting it here, and the Y information and putting it there, and her information here and here, you can see the 4 potential offspring. Here, you can see that one option is to have a daughter with normal vision. The next option is to have a son with normal vision. Here, you could see that a daughter who is a carrier with 1 recessive allele is an option. But if this egg, let's say that this information went into 1 egg cell, were fertilized, there would be a potential that that the son could have color blindness because there's only 1 X allele and only 1 X chromosome, rather. And so because it's inherited the recessive allele, but there is no other X chromosome in which a dominant could be present, that will be expressed in the son's vision. It is important to note when we talk about genetics that many of an organism's characteristics ultimately are also determined by the interaction between the genetic information and the environment. A genetic disorder is something we will study in more depth, and it's an abnormal condition that a person inherits through genes or chromosomes. And it can be caused by changes in DNA of genes, or it can be caused by changes in overall structure or number of chromosomes. So some examples of genetic disorders include cystic fibrosis, sickle cell disease or sickle cell anemia, hemophilia, and Down syndrome, which we will discuss in class in more detail.